Okay, everybody, welcome. Welcome. We are live in our llama party with Llanero and several others. So, Llanero,
Hey, how's it going?
it's going pretty good. How about yourself?
Pretty good, pretty good. Nothing to complain about. I see Kometz, who's a buddy of mine. He's joined. How's it going, man?
I'm good. How you doing?
Good, good. Thanks for coming by.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw you're going to be on the live party today, and I was like, oh man, I can't miss this.
Yeah, yeah. Well, just before joining, actually, I still have it running in my little side computer here. I'm staring at this insane gas feed and the tether uh, burning on top. It's like I don't understand what's going on. Someone explain what's going on.
That was going to be my first question to you, as a matter of fact. What is going on with this? Is this
I don't.
my
Is
gut
it the bank
instinct?
run?
Now, I haven't looked into this at all, but my gut instinct is USDC trying to take down USDT? Because I saw you were mentioning there's some sort of USDT, USDC is all the activity, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Coinbase came out and announced free, a feeless swap of USDT to USDC. I don't know when, maybe yesterday or a few days ago, but if you look at the burn leaderboard right now, like I'm looking at ultrasound.money, you can see Tether is way up there, and it's just in its transfers. So for transfers and for Tether, which doesn't have, I think, a complex contract to be burning that much ETH, something's weird going on. And then of course USDC is hovering high up there, and you have Coinbase wallet number 10 up there. So it seems like that's what's going on, but I don't know. This is like we were talking about, Garrett, the funhouse of DeFi. Right? There's so many mirrors of what's going on. It's hard to decipher without really digging in more.
Well, this will certainly be a lot more fun if all of cryptocurrency collapses and we happen to be live streaming it so that future historians can look back and laugh at all of us.
Well, you know what? When I first started getting a lot more into DeFi, all my friends were pointing to Tether, and I think this is like a common trope within DeFi that Tether is going to be the thing that brings down DeFi. But since that time, it's actually not been right. It's been like everything but Tether, and Tether's actually held. It's held its peg. It's like stayed kind of reasonably good. But right now, maybe this is the moment. So we'll finally get to see Tether being tested again. But I feel like it's actually been tested a lot, and it's actually stood its ground well through a number of different tests. So
Yeah,
we'll see.
I am not super on board with the Tether FUD. I mean, I like it because I'm with Curve, so of course, like if I, there's a ton of Tether FUD, then Curve usually makes some money off of that. So I feel like Michael
I
secretly like is rooting for Tether FUD.
know.
But like I have like zero concern about Tether at this point, which probably means it's the next to go. But I do see it as if Tether goes, like there's kind of no point. Like DeFi as we know it is dead. Another generation of DeFi will emerge, but it'll probably be out of the ashes of of V1.
Yeah, it'll be bad for sure. If Tether actually folds, it would be really a big disaster. That would be the final shoe to fall. I mean, that's right now you feel like so many shoes have fallen. How many feet does this thing have? It's like
Well,
shoes keep falling. But this would be a big shoe falling. That's for sure.
as I see it, I think that the burden of proof is on the Tether Fudster at this point, because the Tether Fudsters have made so many claims that Tether was going to fall, and like there's something shady going on, but it's never at all seemed to have like any stress test issues. So it seems to me that the burden of proof is on the Fudsters at this point.
That's probably true. That's probably true. And this, I'm hoping that really this just ends up being like a big pile in as people start taking advantage of that Coinbase offer and that USDC. Like, I don't mind there actually being more stable coins, in the ecosystem, and there being kind of a wider distribution, more stables and more distribution across more stables is, in my mind, not a bad thing. So I'm hoping that this is just that a little bit of Tether will move into USDC, and we're going to see a little bit more USDC. I actually hope that it's not just Tether and USDC, that it's actually, more stables. And of course, I'm with you on the whole curve thing. So this is all good. And having multiple stables is, all that much better for curve.
Like maybe Clev USD, perhaps.
Yeah, that would be a good one.
Oh,
Let's
wow.
get that in the mix.
But I feel like we have so much that we need to talk about. But why don't we just we had this great cold open where we went through the Tether FUD. But why don't you tell us a bit about yourself for those of you who don't know who you are? So for those of you who are joining, Llanero is the guest of honor here at our weekly, occasionally biweekly, or periodic llama parties. Let's just say. So I just know that you're like a grape with a cowboy hat.
Yeah, that's not a bad description. That's how I feel most of the time. But just first of all, thanks for having me on and for inviting me. It's definitely an honor to be the guest of honor because I've been watching your videos since I really got into DeFi, and I think I went through some of your brownie videos too because I do also like Python. So yeah, very fun to be here. But by way of background, Llanero is my crypto identity, and in real life, I am a SaaS entrepreneur. So I've created mainly two SaaS startups, both of which have been sold. One was a very big sale, and the other was also a reasonably big sale, not as big as the first one because the first one was kind of the unicorn status sale. But those have kind of given me the opportunity to do mostly what I'm interested in. I mean, interestingly, they both of them came as a result of things that I was interested in any case. So the fact that they became great companies and great financial, like changing events, that was actually incidental. It was incidental to the fact that I was just really interested in what I was doing at the time. But what they've done is they've kind of given me an opportunity now to really focus on the things that I continue to be interested in. And right now, and for the past 2 years, it's really been DeFi. And so my journey in DeFi, I think I've heard this from a lot of people at this point. So I think it's actually a pretty common kind of pattern where I first bought Bitcoin way back in like 2015, and it wasn't even like my own doing. It was just because I was hanging out with some friends, like tech friends, and one of them had like this big rig set up, and I was like, hey, what's that doing? And he's like, oh, it's Bitcoin mining. And I was like, say more. And so he started explaining Bitcoin and started explaining mining, and he's like, hey, Llanero, you're a tech guy, you have to buy some Bitcoin. So he pretty much like sat me down and made me pull out my credit card. And, we went on Coinbase at that time because it was at that time, it was like, you could just buy this stuff off Coinbase with a credit card. There was like nothing, no requirements. So I bought Bitcoin. It was $200 a Bitcoin, which is awesome. So, I bought a bunch of Bitcoin, and then I was like really enamored with the idea, like blockchain. If you're a technologist, you kind of get that it's fundamentally different than a database, but at the same time, its function is very similar to a database. So I would say in the next few months, because I was really enamored with the technology, I'd go around and I asked everyone, like VCs, other entrepreneurs, my friends, like, hey, what's the best use case you can think of for Bitcoin, or what's the best use case that you've seen? And like, there were really no good answers, and so it kind of fell off my radar for a little bit because even though I like the technology, I kind of felt like I had this hammer and I was looking for, nails. And so I just, set it aside, got busy with other things. And then around 2017, one of my friends joined a company where they were going to do an ICO. And so, I had like not really paid attention to, I didn't even see the rise of Ethereum. And so he was telling me about smart contracts, and I didn't really get it at first. So I started digging in. I downloaded the white paper. I read the white paper. I started looking at, I went through like a Solidity tutorial and tried to understand what it did. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, hold on. This is not what I thought it was. right? Like I thought the name smart contract was literally just going to be, some sort of fancy wrapper around a ledger. But I realized, wait a minute, this is like really a worldwide computer. It's like AWS, but distributed, right? Like a more specialized version of it. But it was kind of a bit of a mind blowing moment. Um, but since my friend who pulled me in was really doing the ICO thing, and I dug into the ICOs, I was like, "Look, friend of Llanero, I'm super impressed with Ethereum, but I have to say this ICO because I was asking him like, well, so what does the ICO obligate you to if you issue all these tokens?" And he's like, nothing. And I'm like, so you just get all this money and you don't have to do anything. And he's like, that's right. And I was like, that sounds horrible. That sounds like a scam, actually. So I was like, you know what? Thanks, but no thanks. And so I didn't really get sucked into that. Plus, I was really busy in the midst of my second startup at that point. So, I kept paying attention, but I was just kind of a combo of too busy, and the ICO thing really kind of, didn't like resonate with me. But then come around 2020, I started having a combination of more time, and then I started digging into and actually using actually trying to use some DeFi projects. And the very first DeFi project that I used, I'm trying to think, I think it was Wonderland, right? So, it was like, it took me half a day to set up a wallet, to figure out all the different steps I needed to be able to get time. And if any of you have been on the Wonderland Discord or were back in the old days, how many people came by and were like, "What's memo? What's time?" But that was me at that moment. I was learning all those things. But once I kind of started learning and seeing how it worked, then I started digging in. Then I became really enamored and super, super impressed with what I think of as a lot of the DeFi building blocks. And I've written them in my posts, or my pinned tweet. I've written down these are the 5 or 6 things that kind of blew my mind when I really started getting into DeFi. And they still, I mean, to this day, I think they're really about the same things. I am just so blown away by the idea of the AMM and liquidity pools. That to me is Nobel Prize winning stuff, right? If the Black-Scholes formula deserves a Nobel Prize, this deserves a Nobel economic Nobel Prize, whatever it is. But this is truly mind blowing stuff, right? NFTs, I'm a blueberry, but right now I'm a cowboy blueberry. But right now, I think we're at such early stages of NFTs when they're representing art. But I think a big problem within the world of the digital world in general has been when you can reproduce everything with 100% fidelity, there's no real property rights in the world of digitalness, right? Because everything's infinitely reproducible with 100% fidelity. It's truly fungible, unless you enforce it with the legal system, which is just a very inefficient way to own property. But NFTs to me are this amazing breakthrough where for the first time we're actually going to have digital property rights. And I was talking to one of my friends trying to explain this, how foreign of a concept that really is to us in many ways. It's as if the first time Europeans landed in the Americas, going to the Native American Indians saying, "Hey, we want to buy this property." The Native American Indians must have just looked at them and been like, "What the hell are you talking about? You want to buy this thing that we can all freely walk in and around?" It was completely foreign to them. And I think that's kind of where we are now when we look at this. So anyway, this is my very long-winded way of talking about a little bit of my background and, how I fell and continue to fall into the DeFi rabbit hole.
Excellent. No, it's fascinating to hear. And just as a reminder to everyone here who's listening and joining us in Discord, first of all, thank you. And second of all, it's a party, so feel free to unmute your mic, say hi, and ask questions. Otherwise, it's just going to be me asking questions of Llanero for as long as Llanero is willing to stay with us. So how I don't know how what your calendar looks like. Like, let us know if you have to bounce. Until then, I think we'll just keep hammering you with questions. So I think the first thing I'm curious to know, are you still at all exposed to this Web 2 SaaS startup, or is like that in the past and now you're 100% full-time Web 3?
I'm not 100% anything really anymore. I'm kind of, I do things that are like, I've now really prioritized like family life and a little bit of the ability to pursue just like my own geeky interests. And a fair amount of that geeky interest actually overlaps with DeFi. But my Web 2, I sold my last startup to a company in March. And so I'm really on the tail end of transitioning out of that. I'm in kind of like essentially advisory status. I'm in an insurance policy mode, right? Like I don't really do anything for them actively, but I'm essentially like on the payroll as an insurance policy, and that's going to transition over time. First, it's an active transition, and then it's like kind of an insurance policy holdout, and then eventually, you cut all ties and move on. But it's been a good process. I like the company that we sold my startup to, so it's pretty easygoing. I like the people, but it gives me a ton of time to be able to focus on crypto, to be able to focus on my family, which is like great for me.
Got it. So would you say that you're still like bullish on opportunities in like the Web 2 space, but you just happen to be more bullish on Web 3? Or do you like come from the camp that says that like Web 2 is like obsolete and you're kind of like pushing into Web 3 because like, you're afraid of obsolescence?
That's a good question. So I am of the camp that disruption never looks the way you think. Like incumbents are never replaced entirely, not instantly. There's not like a clean cutoff. If you look over a 20-year period on, let's say, the NASDAQ or the Dow Jones Industrial Average or whatever in the index, you'll see that the players get completely, or 50% of the players rotate every 20, 30 years or so. So obviously over a long period of time, companies disappear and new companies form. But I've been in the disruption space for a long time now. And what I've always seen is that the incumbents, many of them morph and they kind of become part of the new crew. And some of them resist and they die and go away. So what you end up with is more of a blend than you do, kind of a pure cut over. And then a lot of times what's interesting, and like everyone can probably appreciate the whole .com brick and mortar battle that we just went through, not just like that we went through 20, 30 years ago. And how what ends up happening is like the winners actually then start taking on the characteristics of a lot of the people that they just displaced. Right, like everyone has probably by now seen Amazon 4-star stores, right? So there was this whole big battle of Amazon taking out all these brick and mortar companies, but then now they have some brick and mortar, right? And so that's not uncommon. And I think we'll see the same sort of thing here. We'll see some Web 2 players really stay ahead of the game. Some will use it as an advantage to take on other Web 2 players, and we'll end up seeing a very blended universe.
Are you familiar at all with Hegelian dialectics?
No, but it sounds cool.
I'm not actually smart. Don't worry. I got this from a video game. But the concept of Hegelian dialectics is that every thesis gives birth to its antithesis, which will necessarily be forced to fight with the thesis and antithesis are forced into conflict. And whatever comes from that conflict is a synthesis of the two concepts.
Yeah.
I feel like,
and I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we're seeing the same thing in that like Bitcoin is sort of like the antithesis to the existing economy that's trying to disrupt. And then Ethereum is almost the antithesis to Bitcoin. So it's like disrupting Bitcoin at the same time Bitcoin's still disrupting Web 2, while Web 2 is still disrupting like the economies that came before it. So it's like all these tidal waves cascading on each other.
Yeah, totally. And you see a lot of this in like the concept of centralization versus decentralization. There's this kind of broad stroke that, Web 2 is centralized and Web 3 is decentralized. And while I think at a very high level that's very true, especially if you think about Web 2, like the big FANG companies in Web 2, like they're very centralized, they're very hierarchical, they're also very old. There's a lot of newer Web 2 companies, and there was this whole Web 2 trend. I'm trying to remember what it was called, but it was this trend, holacracy. Yeah, I think it was called a holacracy. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it was proposed. It was really championed by Tony Hsieh from Zappos, and the idea there was that no one was in charge; that everyone was kind of equal footing, and it was just a very, very kind of I don't want to say free for all, but like very kind of empowered type of organization, and that was like a big trend in Web 2 for a while. I know Zappos really did it. And they pushed it a lot. And so, in many ways, like those organizations, and ultimately that failed, by the way. I would say that it kind of failed. It did not work. And where it kind of looked like it was working for a while, there was a lot of implicit hierarchy because Tony Hsieh and Zappos, like that was very much a cult of personality. So even if it was, a holacracy in theory, people all knew go to Tony with questions, and then he had his people that you would go to. So it was a very implicit hierarchy. But if you look at Web3 projects, there's a lot of Web3 projects that are very, very centralized, right? I mean, there are a lot of personalities in Web3 that we can all point to, even among the protocols that we love and know, right? Like everyone knows the personalities involved in Curve, Convex. Like these are big personalities, or larger than life personalities, just like you see in Web 2. And that's not decentralized, right? And
Yeah.
so it's really not clean cut. Like Web 2 is centralized and Web 3 is decentralized. It's really a case by case basis.
Yeah, decentralization is such a tough topic because I feel like a lot of these Web3 projects need the resilience that true decentralization provides. But at the other hand, like an entity that's too decentralized literally can't get anything done. So you
Yeah.
kind of need that vector of centralization. And it's been really fascinating to watch some of these projects try and juggle these two. And I'm not sure that they're like I'm not sure it's possible to kind of hit that balance correctly.
Yeah. Have you seen or anyone else seen the was it a Medium article or the former CTO of Sushi, I think it was, wrote like an article about his experiences with a DAO, and he had become very soured on DAOs. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was CTO. I'm just seeing if I can find it, but I know that he was talking about a lot of the things that we're talking about here. Yeah,
Was this
sushi's
chef?
been really a whole like fascinating thing in of itself.
Yeah, was this Chef Nomi?
No, I don't think it was Chef Nomi. I think it was Joseph DeLong, the
Joseph?
CTO.
Let's see
Yeah,
if I can
I'll
find
have to
this.
dig it up. But he had written an article. I remember reading an article. It looks like maybe he's done some
This one here?
interviews too. But
This
yeah,
one
I'm
here on the
trying to
screen?
see.
Ex Sushi
Uh,
Swap CTO Joseph DeLong on why DAOs fail.
yeah, exactly. So I think that's like an interesting. That's an interesting. It's really interesting feedback, right? I mean, I think sushi is very much, in my mind, like an OG among DeFi's, and so this really puts this person, Joseph DeLong, in kind of a good seat of something that became very influential, grew very quickly. Tried a lot of these interesting products or approaches, and also pushed out a lot of innovation. Right? I think there's still kind of a lot of stuff that sushi kind of innovated on, and so he's talking about his story, and it's not like one way or the other. It's not like DAOs are horrible and will never work, even though this article is called "Why DAOs Fail." It definitely makes it sound like it's not going to work. I did not walk away thinking that DAOs are impossible to ever run successfully, but I did definitely walk away. And I thought a lot about holacracy when I read it. I was like, oh yeah, that's exactly what we saw when that whole holacracy trend went through.
Yeah, so it's tough because I feel like a lot of DAOs are destined to fail. But then by the exact same token, a lot of like centralized entities are destined to fail. So you could argue that like maybe Solana and FTT would have fared better if had they been actually decentralized instead of incredibly centralized with what's going on with SBF and Alameda and all that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the decentralization concepts, and as a concept, it's incredibly appealing to me because I was an early internet pioneer too. Like my first startup actually was one of the earliest SaaS companies, and prior to that, I was like a very very early internet adopter in general, and I will definitely say that in the earliest days, the main appeal of the internet to me was how empowering it was, that anyone could pop up a website and anyone could publish content. There was like just no restrictions, and you could set up your own web server. It was an incredibly empowering and decentralizing kind of feeling, and I loved it. And for sure it attracted tons of pirates and crazy people, but where it ended up, and I think this is where a lot of the sentiment comes from, where it ended up, what you see today when you see Google or Facebook or Twitter, when you see any of these really really big players, is somewhere along the way most early internet pioneers would probably have to acknowledge that we kind of screwed it up, right? Like we did something really, really wrong. And I'm not sure what it is. I mean, obviously capital interests and, the accumulation of power, occurred. And so I can very clearly look at what's happening now and say like, that's bad. And I can look at where we started and say that was good. And I can kind of maybe point to some of the things that may have contributed to it, but I'm not ultimately that clear. And so with Web3, I think there's this big feel for people. I mean, there's a lot of people who weren't part of that early growth of the internet. They see the end result and they're just kind of appalled by what they see, and they just don't want it from the get-go. And then there's a lot of people who are more like me, who were part of Web2, who kind of think we screwed up and want to make sure it doesn't happen again in Web3.
But are we so wise? I mean, I almost look at the collapse of FTX as like dodging the bullet, because if FTX hadn't collapsed, let's say, we might have ended up with a Web3 that was ruled by Alameda and FTX, and it looked as bad as Web2 does today. You could see, new generation popping on and saying, I'm not a big fan of this crypto thing. It doesn't seem like there's anything in it for me. So we sort of dodged a bullet there, only because like the entire thing just came collapsing down overnight, which is really a good thing about crypto. Is that the important piece of the puzzle? We need to make sure that bad firms fail quickly and don't get bailed out and kind of get propped up as these like zombie firms.
Yeah, I agree. I think seeing FTX fail, and even things like the Luna failure, which I think is, by the way, a very different kind of failure than the FTX failure. But I think they are both ultimately good and healthy for the ecosystem for different reasons. But if nothing else, I think it's bad to have such really disproportionately outsized personalities so early in something, and have that kind of personality dominate so much, right? Like when Luna was collapsing and SBF and Alameda and FTX were doing all the handouts, like there was this temptation to prop them up like they were saving DeFi, right? And I'm sure people were just like outright writing, "Hey, we're saving DeFi," or SBF saving DeFi. And my immediate reaction to that was like, I really doubt that he's doing it out of the goodness of his heart, right? There's a motive here. And same for CZ. I mean, really everyone in DeFi. And I think we can all make friends and we can all develop good relationships with each other. But one of the cool things about DeFi, and this is where I feel like Web3 can be very different than Web2, is Web3 operates best when it's trustless, right? So like even though we may, let's say, like CZ right now, or not. I know he's a controversial figure, and I personally would just as soon not have any of these big personalities involved. Or if they are involved, then I would at least really like to make sure that we separate like what they say from what they actually do. Because when they're doing things and it's off chain, then they're just unregulated traditional finance, which is kind of like the worst of all worlds. But if they're doing it on chain, then at least we get to see, and then we don't have to trust any statements. We get to verify it.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. I don't know if we're going to solve it on this call today. Just nice to know other people kind of are in this space for the same values and like the same principles. Because like that's really when we have these kind of massive like bear markets, what's important is for all of us to reinforce why it is we're here and what like make sure that we're building towards the same thing.
Yeah, for sure. For
Hey,
sure. I mean,
Curve
that's
Cap.
the.
Oh, I was going
Go
to
ahead.
jump in and just ask a question. This is KMETS, by the way. Hey guys, I was just going to ask about the decentralization versus centralization aspect. I guess it all just kind of runs on a spectrum, because even Curve, which I would consider like one of the most decentralized, dApps in the entire space, it still has the emergency DAO feature, right? So it's almost like it can be decentralized, but you almost need like the option to like re-centralize if needed or something like that. So I guess there's a spectrum, I suppose. I don't know if there's ever like a completely decentralized way to manage anything. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, like Aave has the emergency uh, governance too, which I think they had to put into effect thanks to our friend Avi. And so you have other personalities like Avi, who I think serve a really important purpose. And we could kind of hate on him, which I know a lot of people do. Um, but he at the end of the day is not committing fraud, right? He's exploiting loose loopholes, which I think is actually different, because the exploiting of loopholes will actually strengthen the space in the big in the long run. I mean, it'd be much cooler if he were exploiting loopholes and then being a white hat hacker instead of just kind of keeping all the proceeds for himself. But the purpose is still, it's an important function. That's what I was saying, Garrett. We should create the white hat hacker club where we just start finding and exploiting these loopholes, but we just keep 10% of the proceeds and give the rest back.
It's a good idea. It's a good idea, but
Yeah.
It's tough, this kind of dance of decentralization versus centralization. There's actually a Twitter post about it, regarding Curve Finance just this morning, and of course I've been on this call, so I haven't got a chance to see how it's doing, but I popped it up here, where Chris Bleck, who is like a big decentralization advocate, was asking like, what are the weak spots of Curve decentralization? Because I know from talking with the Curve team that they really care about decentralization, maybe more than most other teams. I'm reluctant to say like it's the most decentralized though, because I know that there's still some points, but I think that by and large, like if an asteroid obliterated Sweden, where most of the team, or not Sweden, Switzerland, where most of the team is, it would still be able to continue. Like there's some weak spots in terms of like a lot of the knowledge of how all the different smart contracts works is very centralized. So if you lose a couple of core people, like people would need to discover from scratch like all the different like contracts they need to go look through to be able to kind of like get rewards flowing and moving cross chain and whatnot. So it would be like a big issue if Curve like if Cree players within Curve like got taken out, but the protocol like would still continue to function. Enough of the permissions have been given to the DAO that it would remain resilient, and you just like lose some big voting members, but there would still be enough voting members to continue things. But that being said, there's also like, I would argue that one thing that gives curve value is like Michael and Michael alone could come up with curve USD. Like I'm extremely left of bell curve. There's no way I could come up with something like that. And arguably, like the fact that Curve gets to continue launching these things that were the brainchild entirely of Mitch, like that is a huge asset for Curve. Which, like, if he was not part of the community, like Curve as we know it would chug along. But like the kind of radical innovation that emerged from someone who was able to get it into the system because he is such a key stakeholder, I think is like an argument for centralization on some level.
Yeah, or at the very least, I mean, I think what you just said is that the protocol operations are very decentralized, but the innovation, almost by definition, is not centralized. And I would argue that all day long. I don't think a committee can innovate. I do think that is very much kind of the, one person has to start a spark, and then eventually I think other people have to really come in. But I do think innovation almost has to occur through these kind of one-off type people. And at least I've seen that. I mean, I've never seen a committee innovate something.
It's like when Travis
something.
It's like when Travis Kalanick got ousted from Uber, and Uber basically like stopped being like this like mega innovative growth company. And then it's like you could make the argument that like theoretically anyone from the community could propose Curve USD on the DAO, and if it like if the DAO thought it was like a good idea, then they could vote it in. So it doesn't have to be Mitch. But then again, if you're a random community person that has an idea that good, why are you going to play politics and fight with the DAO when you could just launch your own and be get a little attention to it, find a co-founder who can market it if you aren't capable of doing it, and then you don't need to build it through Curve. So,
sometimes you get. I mean, this is where the community aspect I think is really powerful, because even if you think about like the Aladdin community, we've definitely seen community members posting, and then they're just they're giving their ideas. And so I don't think the innovation has to come from an individual that is on the core team, or, like the operations and the innovation they're not inextricably tied. Like someone can come in and just, give the idea away. And you're right. Like if it's a great idea, there's always the question of, well, why not take that idea and run with it? And I think a lot of people do, and they try creating their own thing. But a lot of people also just, contribute it as a community idea, and then it gets vetted, and then, good ideas kind of surface. And so a number of the ideas that Aladdin have been executing on are kind of like, it'd be difficult to say like this idea came from just this one person. That although they definitely had to have originated from a single comment person or something, but it just goes through so many kind of loops and people and comments and people building on it and adding on it, that what emerges is definitely team effort, even if it started with a individual.
Yeah, although I feel like
I guess I'm kind of countering myself a little bit here.
No, it's a really good point. I feel like Aladdin DAO, like more than most, is sort of set up to be an innovation factory. Like it sort of is like that's its like mission in this world. It seems like is to like have these bull meetings where you discuss DeFi and like get the biggest brains together and figure out like, hey, there's actually an opportunity here. It's worth tackling. Like the only other like comparable entity I've seen to that might be like Paradigm Capital.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't. I definitely know the name. I haven't spent a lot of time with them or looking at any of their stuff. But I mean, that's definitely one of the things that I liked about Aladdin DAO. That's why I joined the Discord originally. I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure how I came across him. I think it was a Kingmaker podcast that I was watching. So it was, I got into Curve and then figured out somewhere Concentrator, and then at some point I think I must have noticed that, hey, the people who made Concentrator are on this podcast. I listened. Kruger, who was like my first, person that I could attach to Aladdin. And then I watched a couple of these Bull research meetings. I don't even know how that happened. I don't know, Garrett, did you ever create a video about them? Maybe you created a video about them, and
I
I
don't
saw
know
it
at this
on
point.
there.
I create a lot of videos at this point, but I'm finally getting that my 10,000 hours in.
Wow, holy smokes! Congratulations, that's
Well,
huge.
no,
Isn't that the point?
I don't know if I'm there yet, but I just mean that like I need to practice it because it's not something that comes naturally to me.
Okay. Well, I mean, it seems fun to me. So you're doing a good job. So that's it. That was definitely a thing that appealed to me with Aladdin. The idea that you have kind of this full research council that can bring ideas to the table, and then you have this execution arm that can kind of execute on really the best ideas. And out of that came Concentrator, and then I've been more involved since Clever came. But that whole thing definitely appealed to me. And the people are really just nice, like Kruger and Charlotte and Paul. Those are some of the main people. They're nice, very OG. They know the space really well. And we have these very honest conversations about like, that's not working, that is working, or that, that's a horrible idea for various reasons. So very, very enlightening conversations.
Yeah, I confess I don't listen to as many podcasts as I should, just because there's not enough hours in the day, and it's kind of weird to me to play them at high speed because then it just sounds like weird chipmunks talking. But I do like, so I'm not fully up to date in all the bulls, but I do like when I have time, like listening to some of them because it really is the best of DeFi. Like if people are the kind of people that like listening to podcasts and like would like to get an understanding of what's going on in Web3, it's probably the best resource out there. Just like really smart people talking about these things. And Charlene, like I said this on Twitter the other day, she's probably one of the like most underestimated or like underappreciated founders out there. Because if I'm not mistaken, she is like the kind of driving force at this point behind Aladdin.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I mean, just what like it. When you talk about the principles of decentralization, the fact that no one knows, like very few people know that she is like behind this like multi-pronged team of geniuses that are fantastic at executing things. Very, very impressive stuff.
Yeah, I had no idea who Charlene was when I first got involved with Aladdin. I only had seen Kruger. So I thought that he was kind of like most of Aladdin, or at least one of the main people, and he is one of the main people, but I just, I had no idea who Charlene was, which just kind of shows how low-key she is. So this gets back to the conversation of, how you can decentralize or decentralize or Web3 projects. I think with Aladdin, it feels much more decentralized in many ways because Charlene's very low-key. And so, she's not like, she's very, listens to a lot of different ideas, and so it's very easy to just kind of, and she solicits a lot of ideas, and so it almost feels like we operate like a multi-sig. Like if enough people say it's a good idea, then let's go with it. And I don't know if that's intentional or what, but it certainly has like the result of creating something that is centralized in some ways, but operates in a very decentralized manner.
Yeah, I think it's some level a bit of a template for how to make it successful. So at this point, you're mostly involved in the day-to-day operations of Clever. Is that correct?
No, all team does. We do all the projects. Aladdin, we haven't really been doing a whole lot on. I think that's kind of. I wasn't involved in the last big V2 of Aladdin. I think that occurred just a little bit before I joined. But that's been backburnered a little bit as we focus a lot on Concentrator. I joined when the IFO was still active and when and Clever was launched, but we didn't have the token. And so right now it's really focused on, I think, taking these primitives that we built and kind of blowing them out into different verticals. So Concentrator was originally all around Curve. That was like the main target. Everything would essentially concentrate to Curve. But then it became very clear that there are a lot of other high quality tokens that people would like to concentrate to. So we've launched, or we're in the process of launching AE, or one of the AEs. We also launched AFXS. That had the misfortune of launching during the IFO, so it was like competing with CTR too. So, it's a great token, and I believe in it long term. So it will continue to accumulate TVL. But now we really are going to have the 3 different concentrating targets. And then you could see that more targets, it makes sense to have more targets. And then the other project that we've been focusing on probably, more so just out of sheer necessity right now is Clever. And we started with Clever CVX. There's kind of a backlog to work through because that had run in beta mode for quite some time and it had attracted a lot of CVX. So we kind of have to work through this backlog of all of this CVX that it initially attracted, make sure that people can, do what they want with the Clev CVX. And so that's kind of been a huge focus. And we've started to really learn a lot about this leverage system and all the different market players and how it needs to operate. And again, I don't know that this is something that you couldn't, I don't think I would have ever been able to identify all these things on my own. Like it was necessary for very experienced individuals like Charlene and Kruger and Paul to chime in and be like, hey, here are all the pieces that aren't quite working. So a lot of that is tweaking the Clever CVX collateral strategy, but then we have also launched additional collateral tokens. So Clev USD is the second collateral token. And then we have Clev CVR that's going to launch. And so you can kind of see this, you can almost imagine a matrix. There's Clever and then there's concentrator. They're like the mechanisms. And then there's either the concentrating target like ACRV, AE, AFXS, or a collateral token. And you can see how they're going to start kind of interlapping and being interoperating, right? Like Clever, Clev USD already leverages the concentrator vaults. And so this is really cool. You just basically have these mechanisms that are really building off of each other. There's a very logical relationship and interplay between them. It's all around high quality tokens. So, the tokens we know and love, Curve, Convex, FXS. A lot of questions about, other tokens that some of us also love, like GMX, but not yet on the deck.
Although the way they're growing, it may be next up, I'd imagine. At the very least, you're gonna have to start considering it, right?
Oh, I mean, it's everyone has to be looking at some sort of GMX GLP strategy, but it's I think the questions there have to do with cross chain and all the other projects that are being built around GLP. I mean, Arbitrum, so much of Arbitrum is GMX and GLP at this point, and a lot of the new projects are around there. You talk about at the Open, we were talking about Tether and how integral it is to DeFi. Well, GMX and GLP are really integral to Arbitrum at this point. And that actually, it kind of worries me a little bit, actually. I'd like to see there be more projects that are as dependent on it. So, we could certainly do something around GMX or GLP, but it's cross-chain and it's also, already got a lot of stuff built around it. So I think a lot of times our needs are, our resources are best utilized serving things that are, not yet served, but there's really a high demand. Everyone wants stables right now. So how do we actually how do we give people more strategies to do more things with their stables? And that's actually what Clev USD and what the AE strategy will do. Because the AE strategy, whether it's a ST or a FRX ETH, it's still fundamentally a stable strategy because you actually are going to deposit stables, but your yield will be converted to ETH. So it's, it is still, even though it's an AE concentration target, it is still mostly a stable strategy. And that's popular now. I imagine it'll be popular for a few more months to come.
Interesting. So who is the kind of primary user of Clever at this point? Because you've kind of got some product market fit, I'd say, with its bear market and 5 million locked there. Like, who's
Yeah.
primarily doing this? Is it like DAOs, protocols, just degens who want some leverage? Like, what's the...
It is not DAOs and protocols. I mean, there are definitely DAOs and protocols who are coming in, but there's not like a huge whale that's come in and taken a huge chunk of it. That's a well-known DAO. I mean, if you can, the distribution is all public. You can look on chain and see how many people are locked in. But it is for sure a Clev Max or a CVX Maxi. At least with Clever CVX, the strategies are a little bit different enough that they might even attract different people. But Clev CVX is for sure a CVX Maxi. Like, you have to believe in CVX and you have to want more CVX, because one thing that we are not, which I think a lot of people confuse, is we're not a liquid form of locked CVX. Like, when you deposit into Clever CVX, you're locked. You're locked to the same 16 weeks as if you locked on CVX. So in that regard, we're very different than, let's say, a Pyrex or Badger, which are really focusing a lot more on liquid locked CVX. This is more about getting more CVX for your CVX, right? So I lock my CVX, I claim Clev CVX. And then the initial idea, of course, was that I take the Clev CVX, I convert it to CVX, and then I relock it, so I get amplified CVX shield. But when we launched Clev, and now that we made the pools available, and if you look, you'll see, well, one, the pools are very imbalanced, so there's a lot more Clev CVX than there's CVX, and that imbalance creates kind of a discount on Clev CVX. And this is one of the things that we've been really working our way through, because one, there is this backlog, right? There was a whole bunch of Clev CVX in the system that got built up over time. But we also started seeing that, there's really the counterparty to this equation. If someone wants to borrow, if they want to swap CVX, or if they want to swap their Clev CVX for CVX, someone has to act as a counterparty to that. Right? Like, someone has to be willing to step in and say, yeah, I will give you my CVX for your Clev CVX. But why would they do that? They would only do that if they can get some sort of discount on that, if they can get it back in time. And so that happens in the system using the combination of this pool and this kind of, I'll call it a discount, or it's kind of a DPEG, but in this case, the DPEG is intentional. Like, Clev CVX would not work if there were no DPEG. There has to be enough of a DPEG for someone to come in and say, yes, it's worth my time to give you my CVX, because I'm getting it at a discount, and then I can deposit into the furnace and actually get that CVX back, right? So it's become a really interesting kind of study as we've seen how people are working with these, how the different players are working with the different products like CVX, Clev CVX, how they're depositing in furnace versus farm. I think we're figuring it out as we go along too. I tend to do it in a very public way, where I'm just like, hey, here's what's happening, and I'm making bad choices too along the way, I'm sure. But it allows us to see, and one of the things that we'll be focusing on is that strategy, which requires discovery, because it's not as clear as I'm just going to deposit and let it auto accumulate, right? Like, that's a clear strategy. That's easy. Llama, Air Force, great at that. If I have CVX and I just want something super simple, set and forget, it's a great resource for that. But the Aladdin Clever CVX strategy is more nuanced and more complex, and it could be a lot more lucrative. But then that just makes it more difficult for people to understand. And so part of our job is to simplify it. Now, in the process of simplifying it, we discover essentially this hidden mechanism that is taking place. It's manual today, and we can automate that. And the cool thing now is we can just kind of, let's say, flip over to Clever USD and say, do all the same mechanisms apply to Clever USD? And they do, but it's kind of a different player or a different person who's going to be interested in Clever USD, because it's, first of all, it's not locked. So you don't have the same sort of locking that you do with Clever CVX. With Clever CVX, you're going in, you got to be a Clever CVX maxi, you got to be willing to be locked. Although there are other strategies that we can talk about of how to play in Clever CVX in a unlocked manner, which there definitely is, and it's all around the curve pool. But with Clever USD, it's really someone who essentially is looking for ways to maximize their stable yields. And there are a lot of different ways to do it. And I think the wisest thing to do in the world of stables and DeFi right now is to not put all your eggs into one basket. To just have kind of stables, like don't put, I love Frax, but even as much as I love Frax, I would not put like all my stable into Frax. Right. I would have it really diversified. And so this gives you like a really interesting way to diversify some of your stables in a way that gives you still the underlying yield, gives you better than the underlying yield, but allows you to really, mostly stay in stables. It's very much a stable strategy. So it's like, to me, whereas Clever CVX is targeted very much toward the CVX maxi, Clever USD should be a toolkit in every DeFi person's toolbox, because it's just like, if stables are going to be part of your strategy at all, which I think they have to be, then you should definitely have Clever USD in the toolbox.
Interesting. That's a very good way of putting it. And I see that it's already gotten a few 100,000 that have crept its way in there. Do you know much about the character of these people? I was kind of curious to hear, like, I was asking about the use case of like who's the Clev CVX user, just because it seems like protocols have been the killer, or the biggest like plurality perhaps, or majority customer of Convex. So I was just wondering if like that was spilling over. So yeah, who's the like target Clev USD person? Just someone who happened to be like overly invested in stables, and is now like disproportionately wealthier than the rest of the market because everything else tanked and their stables are holding up. So they got to do something with it.
Yeah, definitely people with stables. This is like most stable strategies, it works better when you have a larger amount. And so people with larger amounts of stables are really going to be able to get the most amplification from their stables. So this will be, I think, disproportionately people with larger amounts of stables. Right now, the amount that's locked in there, I think it's too early to know exactly who will end up being a locker. I mean, it's actually a really good strategy for DAOs, because it's a great way for DAOs to kind of get some amped up leverage on their treasuries. But this number right now is going to be very deceptive because it's in beta. And so there's not even the ability to really get that leverage that you're going to get once it goes out of beta. And that's really dependent on the liquidity pool being set up. So, I mean, if there's one lesson that I've really kind of learned in the past few months being part of Aladdin and a little bit before, is gaining a greater appreciation for how liquidity pools kind of how to do a number of things on a project, and then also do things with Curve and liquidity pools, and then kind of that interplay between them is something that was not evident to me before, but now it's something that every time I look at a project that has a Curve pool, or even if it doesn't have a Curve pool, I'll try to apply the same thinking to Uniswap or other pools that it might be in. But like, we chatted a little bit about chicken bonds and where that play may be. And I become like really convinced that the Curve pool is a secret weapon, or like an essential ingredient to really figure out and how to understand how these DeFi protocols work. It's kind of like the hidden mechanism behind a lot of protocols. And that was not obvious to me before. Like I knew about Curve before, but I think in my whole time when I was early on, as I was getting rugged by Wonderland and then getting rugged by Snowdog, like I don't think I ever did anything on Curve other than probably swaps. I definitely did not understand how to use liquidity pools, and I definitely didn't understand how to deposit in them, and then how to exit out of them, and the one-sided depositing and exiting, like those. You can do so many really fascinating things there, and it's combination of arbitrage, combination of just kind of making bets on certain tokens, or which of a liquidity pool, which token on a liquidity pool will end up faring better. So I've become like, even though I was already a Curve fan, I've become like ever more so a Curve fan, because I feel like their mechanism is such a unique thing within DeFi. I'm probably singing to the choir at this point, but Curve is definitely a DeFi building block in my mind.
But if so, then why is its price gone down, huh? Checkmate.
I know. I know. But what's it at now?
60 something cents last I was looking.
Yeah, what's crazy is GMX has surpassed the market cap.
It has. I saw that. And yeah, I think it's a testament to just like all the like really cool stuff that GMX is building. Because I admit that when I get in this space, like we were talking about this a bit before the call, there's so much going on. You can't focus on everything. So you kind of have to pick and choose and then decide, I'm not going to look at that. I'm not going to look at that. And I largely haven't spent as much time on Arbitrum as I should. And every time I hear news coming out of the Arbitrum ecosystem, I feel like I'm neglecting Arbitrum to my own peril, because so much cool stuff is happening on Arbitrum. It's like the coolest party in the world. And I'm I'm over on mainnet, where it's got its own stuff going on.
It's the elite party.
There is.
I feel like Arbitrum and Optimism. It almost feels. I don't know if this is accurate or unfair, but I feel like a lot of the Phantom people went to Optimism, and a lot of the AVAX people went to Arbitrum.
Oh, interesting. Could be.
And I don't know if that's true, but when I see a lot of the projects that are launching on Optimism, and I'm not super active on Optimism, even though I was pretty active on Phantom. I see a lot of the same players, like the Velodrome team. I know were people who took the solidly work that Andre and Danielle Festa had done on Phantom, and made an improved version for Optimism. So I think it's basically a fork of that. But then I think what's weird in DeFi is a lot of times you read names, so you don't really know how to pronounce them. So I'm sure I'm pronouncing a bunch of names incorrectly, but I think it's Beavis or something. What's that? The Oath. I know they do the Oath token, but they're the ones who do Reaper and a lot of. I think they did Granary. They've done a lot of really cool stuff on Phantom. I know they've become active on Optimism, on Arbitrum, I think Trader Joe, which is one of the first DEXs that I used a lot. I think they're launching on Arbitrum. So it's just kind of weird. It's like the Phantom folks all went to Optimism, and the Avalanche folks are going to Arbitrum. I don't know why that is, and I don't know if that's just kind of my own perception, but kind of a weird thing.
It's good news for Ethereum if it is the case that all the kind of non Ethereum chains are seeing the activity migrate to the Ethereum side chains.
Yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on the future of alt L1s?
Yeah, I'm very bullish on it. Okay, my initial take was more bearish on it than it should have been, because I also, we were talking about beforehand, to come from a background of Web 2 startups. So I apply a lot of the same thinking from Web 2 world to Web 3. And my thought is, if you're building a business, you don't try and capture the entire market, right? You find the best customer, the 80%, where your 80% of your revenue is going to come from, and you focus like a laser on that, and you ignore everything else. And I saw these L2s as okay, Ethereum already has like super rich whales. Like, and that's a great target market to have. Like these people who have so much funny money lying around that they can like take $1 million and toss it into like a random Ponzi scheme and not care if it explodes. Like that's a great playground right there. So why are you trying to get the rest of the world who is subsisting on $1 a day when you've already cornered that? So I kind of wrote off L2s as like, the ghettos for people who couldn't afford the to live in the nice part of town. And I take that all back because like I'm seeing like that Ethereum developers are that good and that smart that they are able to like both improve the L1 experience and make the L2 experience really, really good at the same time. So I see that they actually are building this kind of like unified vision and they have the chops to do it. And I've just like learned my lesson, never bet against the Ethereum developers because they're that good.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the interest in L2s, well, the alt L1s interests have definitely died down a lot. And so like Avalanche, Phantom, all those things are, they're kind of like, they're hurting.
I wasn't using my terminology precisely there too either. So
yeah. No, I got your meaning. And the L2s, I think, have essentially come in to replace, a lot of the alt L1s. But I think that they will probably explode a lot more if and when the Ethereum price goes up a lot. Like right now, Ethereum, like we can complain about gas fees, and I was complaining about it this morning, but compared to like a year ago, right? Like the gas fees on Ethereum feel dirt cheap because a year ago,
amazing.
Everything was so expensive.
Yeah, I feel like I can afford to play with the big boys.
Yeah, right, and that only took 4x. Right, so Ethereum was what 4,000 at that time, and everything felt really expensive. So it doesn't really have to go up that much for L2s to kind of become in demand again. And so I think there's kind of there's going to be a natural push, and also now that proof of stake is here, and people can see that it does not solve the gas problem. Right, like I think a lot of people were really under the impression that proof of stake was going to like solve the gas problems, even though a number of people were saying it's not. Now that it's kind of clear that it's not going to, that to me still makes like the L2, case bullish in kind of the big picture, in the big scheme of things.
Yeah, so is Aladdin DAO then looking at L2s for the next, whatever your next big project is?
We have the Polygon Acre product, and we also have some on Arbitrum, but we haven't really done a whole lot more on that yet. Part of it is that at least for Concentrator and Acre, there's this dependency on Curve, and so Curve haven't made the V2 factories of it or V2 pools available on Arbitrum yet.
Yeah, fair.
So it doesn't make sense for us to kind of innovate around that. That doesn't mean that AGMX wouldn't be attractive, but that's a very different contract. So that it's very appealing for sure, and a lot of the team is kind of like, yes, we would love to see this, but then you get into the whole prioritization, and then what is our sweet spot, or as you would know from Web 2 world and Web 2 days, like are you the person who's the most logical solver of it, right? Like just because you could sometimes doesn't mean you should. Like the market may not see you as the right answer for that, and that's where I think it makes sense to pay attention to a lot of the up and coming Arbitrum projects. I mean, Arbitrum's funny in that like Optimism doesn't have this same sort of really big cliff from the biggest player to all the others. It's much more evenly distributed. Like there's not a huge dominant player on Optimism. But Arbitrum, half of the TVL, almost half the TVL is basically GMX. And then it's just this huge cliff of all the other players that are trying to figure out how to kind of get bigger and accumulate some mass. And so there aren't really the new breakouts yet on Arbitrum. Then, like I like Umami, which I also kind of track a lot, but Umami's not a protocol. in the conventional sense. Well, they might with the USD vaults. They will become more like a protocol again, but they're kind of a different type of thing. I'd be interested to see if something like Camelot, which I know has been getting a lot of attention, if they continue to grow. Radiant for a while, I thought would probably grow, but they spooked the heck out of a lot of people with their early launch. So I think that kind of ended up fizzling out a little bit. So it's like with Arbitrum, still very much waiting for more players to show up that are going to be big and exciting, and there are a number that I think could be. It's just like a matter of waiting to see which ones really break out.
Yeah, it might be a good time to ask about the StakeDAO partnership that you have for ClevUSD, because I saw that Hubert, or perhaps a Hubert like imitator, joined the party but has been quietly sitting in the corner.
Is it?
No, I'm not a quiet imitator.
Okay.
Just saw the light,
Hey,
so
Hubert.
I was like, okay, the Brazil game is over. What am I gonna do next? And popped in.
StakeDAO is next. I mean, now that we've
Yes.
got ClevUSD out,
Oh,
Clev
we're looking
Curve
forward
is,
to it. Huh? I mean, we have
Oh.
so many use cases for a wrapped SDCRV. I mean,
Yep.
there will be
Yep.
we're working on the cross-chain lockers, so people will be able to lock CRV from Arbitrum, Optimism, etc. And this will need
Yeah.
an SDCRV wrapper. So
Yeah.
we're waiting for yours, or maybe we will need to build like a small one that will be not as good as yours, but just to simplify that. But ideally, if we could do it with yours, it would be amazing. Many other stuff like lending could be super interesting if we could have this SDCRV wrapper. And I think the design you guys are looking at is really clever.
Nope.
So I don't know how much alpha you've shared, but it's I think it can be a great product. So looking forward to it.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, with one of the cool things is trying to get this kind of parity among Clever, because Clever and Concentrate are very different products, even though they kind of sound similar at times. But Clever is ultimately about safe leverage, lending, or safe leverage yield, I guess. Whereas Concentrator really is about picking a strategy and then being able to accumulate some sort of token. But getting parity among the target tokens in Concentrator, the targets, and the collateral tokens in Clever is, I don't know, it's just like intellectually interesting to me, and I think it's important. So being able to have a convex strategy on both protocols, being able to have, like, we don't have a Clever curve, which is why we're so excited about the StakeDAO partnership, because that will allow us to match up with the very first Concentrator target that we created, which was a curve. So now we'll have a Clever curve. So we're psyched. We're psyched. We have, but we have to do this. Yeah, we have to do this in order. So and then everything has kind of, as I'm sure you can definitely appreciate, every launch has its own set of downstream impact. Right? Like as you start figuring out, oh no, what do we do? How do we make sure that we resolve these issues, or that we create something that helps users in our case with Clever CDX? How do we create something that allows the bond buyers to really automate their experience? Like that was a really important learning for us that carries forward to all the other protocols. But we're excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, of course. One thing also, like once you have your concentrator and Clever for SDCRV, you will be able very easily to just like fork it to like FXS, BAL, whatever, right? Because on StakeDAO, every locker has exactly the same architecture as the other ones, right? Even Wi-Fi is coming. And so you'll be able to just copy paste and have many interesting stuff to push and new communities to reach, I guess.
Yeah, that's going to be exciting. We're psyched about that. I think that's we have a couple things that we're going to try to wrap up. I mean, as we get into the tail end of this year, a number of the team, myself included, are going to start disappearing on various holidays and vacations. So we have a couple things that we're wrapping up there. The Clever Curve product is really looking, I think we're thinking January is going to be a great time for it because it's going to, everyone will be back. There'll be a lot of attention again available. So that's, we did USD before, and then we're going to do Curve right after holidays.
Nice. Okay, I stop hijacking your your call.
No worries.
No, it's a
actually have to
party.
get running soon.
Yeah.
Yeah. I gotta get running. Yeah, I know exactly. It's a party, but I think everyone just allotted an hour because now they have to leave.
I just mean like
be you and Kemet.
the more conversation we get, the better. So really happy to have you commenting.
Yeah, definitely. All right. But I do have to get hopping. So I think I will,
right.
peel off soon. But again, Garrett, thank you for having me on. This has really been fun. I mean, I saw when you first posted that you were trying to do this and I missed that. So now I know what the format is and, I can join in others. Is it generally this time that you shoot for?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure it out, but it kind of feels like 9 a.m. is like a really good time. That kind of filters out the people who aren't in Web3 full time because like all the US is working by 9 a.m.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
It just happens to be like I've been like asking people like what time works best for them, but generally like I think mornings is good because then people in Europe, if they're still awake, can join. It's not as necessarily good for our friends in Asia, but yeah. I have one question before you go, though, which has been killing me. And what is Llanero? Is it a portmanteau of llama and Monero?
That's a great question. I've never heard anyone present that. I wish I could say yes, because that's actually a much cooler answer. So a Llanero is Spanish for like a kind of cowboy.
Okay. So
my whole when I adopted this I guess cryptonym, I was starting to also buy my first few NFTs, and I just kind of I stumbled on this NFT. This is actually I think my first NFT that I purchased, and then I was like, you know what? I really like these cowboy hat NFTs. I wonder if that's like a thing. And as it turned out, a lot of NFTs, that's like a property. So I was like, I'm just going to accumulate a couple of these, cowboy hat things. So if you do look at my NFT collection, they're just like, I'm a horrible trader. Like there's no actual logic behind it. It's just like, yeah, that's like NFT that I like with a cowboy hat. But anyway, that just kind of, became the theme. So a Llanero is, it's a kind of cowboy.
I did not know that. It's
actually a pretty cool thing. Yeah, look it up on Wikipedia.
I should have done that.
Cool entry.
I should have done that, but that's how left to bell curve I am. So are you a cowboy in real life too, or just in Web3?
More Web3. In real life, I'm like a digital cowboy, I guess you could say.
All right. Well, I'm going to imagine you living in the American Southwest then.
That's not that far. It's not that far off.
Okay. Pretty good.
All right.
Really appreciate you stopping by. Yeah, this has been a blast. Hope you can come back and join as guest of honor or as someone helping us get good conversations going with any future guests of honor. One thing that we try and do to keep your mind on in the background is anyone we have as a guest of honor, we ask them to nominate someone else to become guest of honor so we can kind of keep paying it forward. The chain got broken a little bit because Naga King nominated Avi from the Ave attack. And Avi has not responded yet. But put some thought into who would be a good person to have come and fill your seat in the future Llama party.
I will. There's definitely a lot of great people that I'd love to hear from. So I'll definitely shoot you a note.
Excellent.
Avi, that'd be funny.
Yeah, that
would be a funny conversation.
That'll be a really good one, I think. So we'll still keep trying to chop wood in that. But no, really appreciate you coming by, and really appreciate all the stories and all the thoughts, and we'll catch you again soon.
Yep, my pleasure. All right, see y'all. Bye bye.
See you. Bye bye.